we have for an agenda today. And then we will start diving into the presentations. We'll do our best to stay on time or a little bit ahead of schedule as we work through. I will also make a request, and I know that it's less than ideal, but a couple points as Emily was talking, the video and audio got a little bit jumpy. So I will ask that if you're not presenting, that you turn off your camera and make sure that your microphones are muted. When we have a lot of cameras on, sometimes it can eat up bandwidth, and it does make things a little bit challenging to make sure that the presenters are able to get their information through to everyone. So again, really quickly, we'll just walk through today's agenda. Our first presentation will bring kind of a real world and practical approach to how different drainage authorities manage utility crossings and utilities within their drainage systems. So we've got Ashlee, Ricci, and Tim Stahl, who will give some background on how their drainage authorities manage different development and policies and issues facing permitting of utility crossings and how they work through that within their drainage authorities. After that, we've got a panel that will include Chris Otterness from Houston Engineering, myself, and bringing an example from my prior life at the Coon Creek Watershed District in Anoka County, and Chuck Brandel talking about some instances where they've come across some pretty significant utility work that overlays the drainage systems, and just talk about some things that come up even when you think you have a mechanism in place that can manage utility crossings. It's amazing what can still happen in the real world. The real world tends to not always work well with what we think in theory or how we set up our policies. And these are some pretty unique examples of some issues that have come up along the way. After that, we've got John Kolb and Cale Van Bruggen from Rinky Noonan. I believe both of them are intending to be on. We'll have some conversations on some best practices that drainage authorities can take into consideration when you're looking at right-of-way, easements, and things like that. And the reason that right-of-way and easements is helpful is it does provide some context and framework for our drainage systems when it comes to how to manage utility crossings and how right-of-way and utility crossings can overlap in a lot of instances within that. We'll take a 45-minute lunch break. We will come back then for Barbara Cedarberg from Gopher State One Call is going to join us and talk to us about Gopher State One Call, how utility locates work from their end, and even some information that can be helpful for a drainage authority to actually register as a utility and facility operators, and what sort of information they need to make that work. After that, we'll give a brief overview of a couple of drainage work group updates and talk about a couple of court decisions that have happened recently in Minnesota and how that might affect the agricultural drainage world or drainage world in general. We'll try not to delve too deeply into what the cases necessarily mean, but more just talk about them broadly and share some information and make sure that folks are aware of it so that people can be kind of aware and paying attention as those various appeals move forward through the legal process. We'll take a brief break and then we'll wrap up with multi-purpose drainage management. This is a program update from Henry Van Offlen and Chad Engels. So Henry's going to talk a little bit about the program itself. Chad is going to talk about some of the work that Bois de Sioux Watershed District has done with that program within their district and things that they've done there. And uniquely enough, some of the information in Chad's presentation will also talk about some of the things that they've run into around utilities in the work that they've done, even through those sorts of programs. We'll wrap up pretty comfortably between 3 and 3:15. We'll do our best to wrap up then or sooner and make sure folks have time to move along and take a little break and move back into those caucuses that Emily had discussed. And again, it's important to try and be there so that your voice can be heard as a member of MAWD, and you can help share that perspective and share that information for the upcoming meetings that you'll have. So again, before I turn it over to Ashlee and Tim, I'm going to turn it back to Emily real quick, and just a reminder for folks as well to make sure that you turn your cameras off if you're able to do so, just so we're not eating up bandwidth. Emily, if you have anything else before we get going.
Yeah, I just have one little thing. If you are looking at a screen of a whole bunch of names and a tiny little picture of Tom and me, if you can go up to the right hand, the top right corner, and hover over it, you'll see a view. And if you change that to speaker view, you will just see the main speaker, and then everybody else's names will just kind of be small at the top, but it's a lot easier to see and enjoy the presentations instead of in the gallery view where you're just looking at a whole bunch of names. So just a little tip there. And so we'll get started. So welcome, Ashlee and Tim.
Yeah, I'm here.
Here as well. Thank you, Emily. Thanks, Tom. I will jump into sharing my screen for a presentation. Let's see here. Can we all see the presentation here?
Yep.
Sweet. Okay, so good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Ashlee Ricci. I work as a technician and drainage inspector for the Rice Creek Watershed District. Today I'll be discussing how we avoid utility conflicts within the public drainage systems. First, I'll touch on some background information about the Rice Creek Watershed District. Then I'll move into the types of engagement that the district has encountered when it comes to utilities. There we go. So the Rice Creek Watershed District is located in the North Metro area. It contains parts of Anoka, Hennepin, Ramsey, and Washington counties, encompasses 21 individual drainage systems within 186 square miles. The district serves as the drainage authority for all of these systems within its boundaries. In addition to its role as drainage authority, the district as a watershed authority partakes in activities such as water quality, flood control, and its regulatory program. So the district has some unique characteristics when it comes to public drainage systems. In almost all areas of the district, the topography is flat and the water table is typically pretty high. So the district is made up of some of the most rapidly urbanizing portions of the state, as well as completely urbanized areas and agricultural communities as well. So many of these century-old agricultural drainage systems are now serving as the sole outlet for these fast-growing urbanizing cities. As precipitation events increase in frequency and intensity, stormwater conveyance is more important now than ever. And so this demand for stormwater conveyance has really put an unplanned demand on the public drainage systems, which have now become some of the most critical infrastructure in these areas. For this reason, the district has established a systemic approach to maintaining and repairing all of its drainage systems. In general, these conveyance systems fall into both traditional and non-traditional public drainage systems. The traditional systems are open channel or agricultural tile, as pictured here at the bottom of the slide. As I mentioned, we're working to replace all of the clay tile with plastic pipe and to repair all the open channel systems. But it's not always that easy. There's more there's those non-traditional systems where the drainage system is located in a deep ravine or within storm sewer. So both of these non-traditional systems are found in, of course, the developed areas of the system where there is already a lack of accessibility. So that's a little about the characteristics of the public drainage systems that we manage. Now I'll discuss the challenges we've faced and how the district has approached these utility crossings. The first challenge I'll touch on is addressing, the sins of the past or those historic problems, how they got there. And then we'll look at our second challenge of how do we plan ahead and address the installation of new utilities so that we don't run into these problems down the road. Last, I'll wrap up with our third challenge of how do we inform the public and utility companies about drainage systems to prevent unauthorized activity from occurring on the systems. So the first challenge, sins of the past, the historic problems. Well, historically, little attention was paid to public drainage systems when utilities were being installed. I'll touch a little bit more on this in a few examples, but the district found as it was investigating and maintaining drainage systems that there were multiple conflicts with a variety of utilities. And so we primarily run into three categories of conflicts. These include the municipal water and sewer service lines, what we'll call the small utilities, and then the big ends of the pipelines. The picture to the right is actually a pipeline spanning over a ditch bottom after a system was repaired. So the first example for the municipal water and sewer service lines, these utilities, were often installed during projects that were permitted by the district. But at the time of permitting for many types of these utility installations, the as constructed and subsequently improved condition, or the ASIC, was not established, and the historic record was really unclear. To resolve these historic problems, the districts needed to investigate the historic and current function of the system. And as a result, many of these systems have gone through a records reestablishment process already. And so this will be a running theme for all system crossings, that the ditches were there before the utilities, but we do need to establish a clear record. And so for these municipal lines, when we find that there is a drainage system conflict or an obstruction, we have to weigh the cost of lowering these utilities versus the potential value of the restored function. Our most recent example is along Anoka, Washington, Judicial Ditch 3, we'll call it JD3. JD3 needed significant maintenance and repair. The system is primarily surrounded by residential neighborhoods, with some agricultural areas located further upstream. During investigation for the large system repair, we did note that a road culvert was about 2 feet above the ASIC. And so we dug into it and discussed with city staff. And of course, we found out that right below the road culvert, there was a water main and other utilities. So we looked at what was the cost to lower that culvert. Turned out to be just a smidge at $45,000. So what do we do? We had the district engineer model the conditions of the system with the existing culvert and with it lowered. The model indicated that lowering the culvert would only decrease flood elevations by about 1/10 of a foot, and that the decrease was localized and really didn't extend to portions of the system upstream, which were still in agricultural use. The nearest egg field is actually over a mile upstream of this crossing. So that far away, there really would be zero effect from lowering the culvert. We brought this information to our board, and then they determined at the time that it's not necessary to lower the culvert. However, we made it very clear with the city that they will be required to lower the culvert at the time that the utilities are going to be replaced, which may be down the road quite a while, but it's there. We acknowledged it, and it's on the record that it needs to be lowered. So small utilities. So we frequently encounter these service lines adjacent to or in line with the road crossings of public drainage systems. And typically these crossings, the road culverts were installed above the ASIC profile because they were typically just slapped on top of the sediment rather than excavated down to a channel bottom. So same as the municipal service lines, we approach this problem by clearly identifying the profile and the ASIC, and then requiring the company to lower the utility. Oftentimes that requires that we be very persistent, and that we actually try and get crews on site to observe the situation. And thankfully, these utilities, with them being a little bit smaller, are typically easier to lower and much cheaper. But what's not easy to lower? The pipelines. So how did the pipelines become a problem? Well, oftentimes pipeline companies are completely unaware of the existence of public drainage systems, much less the significance of the systems. So here's just a couple pictures from different angles of the same pipeline crossing. This is an example along JD3, which I touched on with the municipal crossings. JD3 is kind of just our poster child for problem utility crossings. The picture actually has 3 pipelines in this area of both active and abandoned lines. And of the 3, there are 2 that are exposed above the ditch bottom. Oh, there we go. So continuing along the JD3 example.
Ashlee?
Yes.
If I may ask a question on the previous slide,
Yeah.
those pipelines that are there and those that are exposed, are those natural gas pipelines or oil pipelines, or do you know for sure?
I believe these ones are the petroleum.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. I could double check with Chris. There's multiple crosses. The pipeline crosses the system actually multiple times in multiple areas. And I think they're all Koch petroleum, but continuing along that example. So the Koch petroleum pipeline crosses JD3 in multiple spots. JD3 is actually considered a public water course in addition to a public ditch. So that means that crossing the system actually requires a license from the Department of Natural Resources, Land and Minerals Department, as well as a permit from the district. And so Koch obtained its necessary license from the DNR, but did not contact the Watershed District. And so even though the DNR license required permission from all other agencies having authority, it didn't clearly identify those authorities. So how do we handle that? Well, frankly, we just notify the pipeline company of its obstruction and the responsibility to lower it, which is, obviously a very cheap and simple task that they're thrilled to take on. But Chris Otterness with Houston Engineering, he'll be talking about this a little bit later in his presentation. So that's the historic problems and how we've approached them. It's notifying the utilities of their responsibilities and working to make sure that there's not an obstruction. So now what do we do currently to plan ahead and address new utility installations so we don't have these historic problems in the future? Well, what we've done and the district is we've incorporated an entire section into the district rules to address public drainage systems. The rules state that the utility may not be placed within the right-of-way of a public drainage system without first obtaining a permit. And then the rules further state that 5 feet of separation from the ASIC is required, and record drawings and the NAVD 88 data must be submitted to verify the separation. Occasionally, unique site-specific circumstances, Tom touched on them, the real life in the ground situation, they're not always what we design. And so it requires a closer look at if the 5 feet of separation can't be met, what do we do? But no matter what, at the end of the day, the utility company is responsible for their crossing. So we've got the rules. How do we apply them? And how do we apply them specifically to the utility crossings? The biggest thing, staff encourage pre-application discussions, especially when a drainage system is involved. A drainage system issue, if it arises during the process, the permitting process can really extend the process and make for really disgruntled applications if we don't have those discussions ahead of time. So we handle that, once an inquiry or even an application comes in to staff and it's identified that it's along a public drainage system, the permit staff immediately engage our drainage staff. And so drainage staff have are immediately notified and have a chance to give feedback right away to permit staff of, is there a concern on this area? What do we know about it? Is there anything on the landscape that developers, anybody looking to do work should really be aware of? So during the permitting process, a maintenance declaration is required, and then we do incorporate language into the permit requiring notification to drainage staff before work on a system begins. And so it requires that both our permit inspector and our drainage inspectors work together to ensure that the drainage inspector can actually be on site during the work on the system. Because once that final product is underground, we know it's very difficult to verify, and it's a very expensive fix if something is needed to be changed. And so consistent with what we've been saying, we always require record drawings as well. The picture is of a box culvert where we've got, or a box manhole where we have a public drain tile system coming into and then outletting from storm sewer ponds. So it's, we had staff on site, and good thing we did, because the contractor installed that backwards and had the weir on the wrong side and the orifice is all mixed up. So another example is Ramsey County Ditch 4. This is in a developed area. And so as part of a redevelopment project, an applicant actually was proposing a new sanitary sewer to cross under the ditch. And so the sewer system is a gravity system with a fixed outlet elevation. Unfortunately, the fixed outlet elevation limits the depth of the utilities installation, and they were only able to propose 2 feet of separation instead of the required 5 feet. And so the sanitary sewer installation has a much tighter grade tolerance. So there was a better level of certainty that there would be at least 2 feet of separation, whereas for board utilities, there's kind of an unknown as to the depth that they'll be at as they're just moving along and boring the utility. So because they were unable to meet the 5 feet of separation requirement, the utility was placed in a steel casing to protect it from inadvertent disruption during any drainage maintenance. So in addition to the protection, the casing also acts as an indicator of the utility's presence if we have an overzealous excavator. Another option for that can be a really good indicator is using insulation sheeting, the bright pink foam or blue foam, as an excavator or an operator is moving through the earth. It's a change in material, so hopefully they feel that, and if they don't, they at least see the bright color and know that there's something weird and they need to be careful. So how do we prevent unauthorized activity on public drainage systems? So the permit program is really only effective if an application is submitted and they follow through in the process. So we have quite a few examples in our district from even very recent past of unauthorized work that has affected public drainage systems. Sometimes it was simply a lack of knowledge that a permit was needed, and sometimes it's a lack of desire to comply with needing a permit. So the bottom right picture, in the top center, there's a yellow beehive there. It's actually smashed, and it's sitting there, trying to sit there on the drain tile intake of a public drainage system. And so staff got a little suspicious as to why a beehive would be smashed. It's typically the farmers go around the intake and don't mess with it. But so we investigated, and it didn't take long to find that there was an unauthorized private connection to the public drain tile, which is pictured. It's a kind of a blurry, not very clear picture from our sewer cam, where the left side of the picture is actually the pipe, and then the reddish orange is actually a feed sack that the landowner had wrapped around their pipe connection and had been sucked in to the pipe. So how do we ensure compliance, since not all unauthorized work is as obvious as this example? So the biggest thing is communication, increasing awareness by increasing communications to landowners, utilities, municipalities, road authorities. We've increased meetings before and during records reestablishment proceedings and system repairs. So we'll hold at least one or more public information meetings before we even start any legal proceedings. And so we also meet regularly to with cities and road authorities to reiterate that the importance of drainage systems and the crossings and obstructions, if there are some. And so to make the and we try to make the permit program more accessible. We try to make it as painless as possible while still protecting the drainage system. But I have a coworker, and she loves to say, there will be hoops to jump through, but we're here to make sure that no one lights those hoops on fire. And so this means we, offer those pre-application meetings ahead of time. We offer site visits when a site's kind of doesn't match the ground doesn't match what's in the plan. And then we also take feedback from the applicants and their consultants and contractors to better understand their construction methods and their planning. What information do they need? What information do we need to make sure we're all on the same page? And then if changes are needed, we incorporate those into rule updates. And so, that's, we're pushing it. We're talking to people. We've got our permit program. We're out in the field. We're watching over things as much as we can. But is there anything else that we really could be doing? And so maybe I hope to learn more from Barbara's presentation later this afternoon, but Gopher State One Call is an option. We know it has the potential to get the district engaged as part of any dig activity near a public drainage system. We do know that it would require accurate mapping of the systems, and oftentimes for our drain tiles, we don't know super accurate locations and elevations. And it would also require additional engagement by district staff, but we're not entirely sure what kind of effort that would be. And it's really unclear if that increased engagement is worth the effort for the few likely crossings. But as I said, I look forward to the presentation this afternoon to learn more about our options to enroll in Gopher State One Call. So that's it. That's all I have. That's how Rice Creek Watershed District handles utility crossings and conflicts along public drainage systems. Thank you for your time, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks, Ashlee. We'll turn it over to Tim now. I did see one chat came in the chat box wondering if the municipalities, are the municipalities treating the urban storm sewer water before it releases to open water? I'll let you kind of take a stab at that, but I believe the answer is generally yes.
Yes, let's see here. I'll pull. There we go. Yep, so cities are required through not only our permitting program, but through MS4 to look at treatment of storm sewer. And so our permit program, we have a whole section for stormwater treatment, and they have to meet so much reduction in loading, nutrient loading, and also rate control for flood mitigation.
Thank you, Ashlee. Unless there's any other questions for Ashlee, we'll turn it over to Tim and he can talk a little bit about the perspective from a little bit more rural side of things and kind of the work that they do to manage utilities in their area.
Hey, thanks a lot, Tom. Let's see if I can get this done right. Can everyone see my screen, or anyone see my screen?
Not yet.
Oh, that's not good.
I will jump back in to say, as far as the municipalities treating stormwater, existing stormwater infrastructure does not get treated, but anything new is required to be treated.
Thanks, Ashlee. Tim, your screen is up now.
All right, even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while, all right? And in the words of Tom Sawyer, whiskey is for drinking, water is for fighting. A little bit, probably not going to go into how we deal with the day-to-day. What I'm going to talk about today is for those drainage authorities that have large projects. We in Jackson County, the map I have up right now, this is of course Jackson County, showing our almost 100 drainage systems that we have and our almost 500 wind turbines. So when you combine 100 plus 500, that tends to lead to some possible problems. We've had 5 large projects. When I say large wind turbine projects, those are turbine projects that are permitted through the Department of Economic Trade and Development, so not permitted through the local entity, local planning and zoning. And so as such, it comes from above. However, myself and quite a few engineers in southern Minnesota, we had met with DEED, actually the PUC, who grants the permit, and have built a nice relationship so that in those permits, that are at a state level, it is a requirement of the permit to work with the counties for a development agreement. One of the components of the development agreement from an engineer is the road use agreement. There's massive damage to roads caused by not just the large turbines or the tower sections, but the concrete, 500 yards of concrete per base, 3 loads of rebar on semis, and it just goes on and on. But also drainage can be an issue, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Our first projects, though, we're kind of in an area over here. This was actually the first project. You can see, hopefully you see my cursor moving. Not a lot of ditches there, ditch systems. Then our second, then our third, then our fourth, then our fifth. And we've had a couple of small projects over here. And those ones, however, are permitted out of our planning and zoning office. And they defer to the county highway department, drainage authority, drainage engineer, that those small turbine projects even are required to have a development agreement. Now, part of the development agreement, which not all counties have. Tom, can you check in? Do you see an Exhibit D?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And fortunately for you, I'm not going to go through this word for word. Everybody's probably going, oh my God, he's going to go through a document and read it to us. No, won't do that. I will highlight a few things. In what we have found in the projects as we've gotten a bit smarter, and the development agreement that we use in Jackson County makes the rounds. Rock, Murray, Cottonwood, most counties in southern Minnesota, all the way up to Clay County in northwestern Minnesota. Part of what we do is with this development agreement is we work as much as we can with the developer. However, the developer, contractor, subcontractors, it can be very difficult. The most important thing, even more so than the documentation that we put together, as was stated by Ashlee, is the inspection. In Jackson County, we actually have a drainage crew, a drainage supervisor, and a full-time crew in the summertime. So we are able to inspect. And even with these large projects, nothing occurs on the county system, either the judicial or the county system, that we don't do. We don't allow work to occur on the county system unless it's us touching it. So I'll just highlight a few points that have worked for us in Jackson County. We provide a location of the public drainage system to the developer. And that is very helpful. If you have an opportunity to go onto the Jackson County website, you'll see that we actually have an online work order that our GIS technician helped develop here in the county. But excuse me, we provide the information. Most of the companies, they're large enough that they do themselves take it in GIS format. And so before they begin their projects, they tend to know where things are at. So what can damage our systems? Well, the first thing is the crane tracking. The cranes are quite large, but not just the main crane. Most of the time there are two what are called RT cranes, rough terrain cranes. And a rough terrain crane, to give you some idea of the weights that they carry, is similar to 2 loaded grain carts going down the field, going down a road together. And actually in Minnesota, it is illegal to go down a road with a loaded grain cart because of the damage that it causes. So the developer provides back to us the information in a GPS format using, of course, our coordinate system. And that very much helps. Usually, this is what we receive to begin with when we start working with them. This is a map of one of the projects that we had. This was the Annexco project way back in 2010. This project worked out swimmingly. This was our fourth big project. And I think Chuck's going to talk about later on the system he's going to talk about is JD19, which is more or less in this area here. The Annexco project went very well. In fact, the point that of all the items we worked on, the company Annexco was going to use that as a format of going to other states. I've received calls from Colorado and Texas that Annexco was in their county, their state, and asked quite a few questions about the development agreement. So it worked out very well. So these cranes track between the towers, and sometimes they try to avoid the tile lines. We have a current project currently being permitted that the crane path was modified so they would not go over county tiles. And why is it important? This is the large crane. This is the erection crane. And this is actually a road crossing. And I show this for two reasons. One, to show the size of the crane with the counterweights, of course. The other thing is we might have great language with our road, or decent language with our development agreement. However, as you get down the food chain, you can see this contractor, excuse me, in the development agreement in the road portion, these wooden weight distribution pads, or crane pads, they call them. These are supposed to be continuous. So when my road inspector was out there and came back and showed me the picture, I pointed out to him that this was worse than just having the crane walk across the road. What we've experienced with these large cranes is they will collapse a road, not in poor condition. 6 inches is not out of the norm. A paved road, they will actually leave their tracks 6 inches deep in a paved road. So we do things like this to eliminate that type of damage. So another reason we do this is for the developer. Why do they care? Why should they care? In this way, if they provide us with the crane path, then if there's a problem 200 feet, 400 feet, quarter mile away, they're held harmless at that point. By having the crane path, we can look back and see if the problem was related to a crane crossing or was it something else. And that has happened. We have had individuals, landowners come back and say, hey, my tile worked fine up until the crane crossed. And it actually turned out to be where he planted a row of lilacs. The lilacs had plugged up the tile line. Also working with the developer / contractor. Here's another thing we work with them on is temporary public ditch crossings. They can occur. They do occur. And so we've set up some systems here that we give the contractor some options. By having options, they seem to work much better with us. Of course, the drainage supervisor is out on the project. One of these shows that they must remove the lower the crossing, take it off after 12 hours. That's one of the options. If it's going to be in for an extended period of time, all those type of things. One other thing that comes with tile projects, wind projects, are access roads. What we provide, it says in here, is we give them basically the coordinate system of where the crossings occur, with which access road to which turbine. Let me see. turbine is over. Actually, these are the turbines that they had on the projects over here. We also share with them what the depth of tile are, and the different lengths are probably due to, is it a square crossing, perpendicular, or is it diagonal? And we treat the contractor the same as we treat ourselves in road construction, in that we replace the tile line, whatever age it is, and then put 2 inspection tees on both sides of the access road. Again, what is the benefit for the contractor developer is with all the loads that are going in, it is most likely that tile will fail. However, by putting in a new tile line and having the inspection tees, we can isolate if during construction the tile is damaged. We do the same thing. We provide the same information or very similar. You see these tables are identical for feeder lines, the collector lines, they call them, between the turbines. These may many times follow the path of the crane, but there are times they do not. And staying on that subject, the collector lines, how do we deal with them? The collector lines themselves, we have a whole list. I won't read through it. You can, if you want this information, I have a link at the end. You can email me for this. I also would recommend just work with your county engineer because they will be focusing on the roads, but this language would be there for all drainage managers, drainage system managers. But what we're looking at trying to do with these tile lines is, while the collector line is not charged, they only charge it, they test it, is that after the placement of the collector line, we, the county, go in and replace the tile line 10 feet, measured perpendicular, you can see, from the top, from their collector line. What our reasoning for that is if there's any work in the future, a repair, improvement, Chuck's going to have to deal with that, and he's going to talk a bit about that actually on the Annexco project. But if we have to do any repair, that definitely helps out that we've provided a safety distance for our drainage crew to make repairs. So that's an area we should not be concerned about. The power companies, these state that we have to pay them for shutting down their system if we have to work by their line, and that's not something we want to do. So this is what we have done. And what we also do is, once we get the map back from them showing where their collector lines are going to go, with that 10-foot distance, you could see through this area, they would have quite a substantial cost to replace 10-foot perpendicular. So we do give them the recommendation to move it. It's their choice to move their line or pay for a crossing. Here's another example that this was actually a working copy prior to a final copy. We do require a final collector line location, but it comes in GPS, GIS form. And so it is something that our crews know going out to a site if they're going to have any problems up front. It doesn't negate 811. It just does help us out and has the companies a lot more comfortable. I will say, for the most part, after projects are completed, they always have a maintenance crew that is, most of them been very good to work with. We, as far as I know, for the last 10 plus years, I think we're at 15 years on our first project. There has never been a time that a system has had to be shut down in order for us to do a tile repair. I almost forgot this one. This is this is near the end of the whole process. So those two tables that you saw before, the Excel tables, this is a graphical representation that we have to show collector line crossing, access road crossings where tile lines have been replaced. This one does not show the crane crossings on it. After the crane crossings are done, that is still in our files, but not readily accessible to the general public. So conveyance of flow, we're getting basically what we're trying to make sure there is just some small stuff that if they do damage a tile, you do have so many subcontractors who never see this language that if something's damaged, we make sure that they don't just cover it up, that we have an opportunity to see the damage and how we deal with that. One of the last things that I have is replacement of public tiles. We do require that public drains under roads, same thing there. They can be damaged. They are also responsible for that repair as well. And I think I'm on my last item where I missed something here. Yep, did. A little too fast. Oh, no, I didn't miss it. Down here on 4.1, construction related damages. We said it, any damages, 2 years. That way there's no question. 2 years after the power up of the project, if there's any problems, it's covered. We, again, have not had any problems that way. By doing the legwork up front has yielded that we haven't had any post problems. And the workers out in the field, the maintenance workers have been really good to work with. And last item is, this is actually in Jackson County. So when they start on fire, the procedure is the fire department sets a perimeter and basically watch it burn. And over on the left, I hope you can see, that is my contact information. I have talked and met with many other counties that are in the process of going through a large traffic generator or wind project. We currently have discussions right now in the county about a CO2 collector line between ethanol plants and North Dakota. And we would use a development agreement with that as well. So with that, I don't, oh, there's a couple in chat. Let's see if we have some questions, or Tom, if you want to have.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions for Tim, feel free to chime in or throw it in the chat box so we can navigate that. Nothing that came in the chat box, but I do have a question, Tim. So you mentioned that you guys use a development agreement. I assume that that's a pretty similar structure to a permit application type process. Is that accurate or not?
It's actually probably far more detailed than a permit.
Okay.
Because of the scope of these projects. Now, each turbine that you're looking there, I think, is north of $5 million. And so when we have our meetings, I do point out that we might be such a small cog in your system, but you break that cog and that system doesn't work. So I'm not going to say that all projects have gone swimmingly. The later projects, the Nexco was the best. We had a follow-up that wasn't so good. And on the horizon, we have another 100 turbine project. There is a benefit to the county. There's a wind production tax. Each turbine you see there produces about $5,000 worth of tax a year. And so the county receives 4,000 and the townships receive 1,000. So after the fact, it's a huge benefit, but there is both road and possible tile damage as the project is going forward.
Thanks, Tim. I have a question for you, Tim, and then the same question for Ashlee if she's still available when you're done. So to come up with the development agreement, was that a process that that Jackson County had a template that they worked off of somewhere from that someone else did? Or is it a process that you guys sort of have pulled together and then just continued to improve on your own? And then Tim, when you're done, the same sort of question for Ashlee in terms of how they review their permit process for utility crossings.
Easy question to answer. I have to give credit. In about 2005, I asked 6 other county engineers south of Highway 212, because we were all being picked off with developers doing these projects, that we sit down. And so monthly we met, came up with the development agreement, a lot of the language. Now, we were one of the first counties that the wind turbines were going into that had an extensive tile system. So the drainage system was, got to give credit to my drainage supervisor, Dave Motzik. He brought the problems forward and we sat down and hammered out how we're going to put together the drainage portion of the development agreement. But credit has to go to a lot of other county engineers who took the time to help work that through. The document currently still makes its rounds. And so I'm kind of the keeper at the end, always checking with what is the most recent project and what is the best language available.
Perfect. Thanks, Tim. Ashlee, do you have any background on kind of when or what prompted the rule and the permit process for Rice Creek?
Yeah, so the district knew that it had drainage systems, but depending on board members or board interest, public drainage systems didn't necessarily take a forefront, and were put kind of on the back burner / before there was more staff that got involved. So hats off to Tom Schmidt, our drainage inspector. When he came on board almost 15 years ago, they said, go fix the drainage systems type deal. And so it's, we took some of our maintenance declarations from just stormwater BMPs, which we already kind of had in place. We used those as, for crossings, and really started to take inventory of what we had, and look at that. Why is it there? What we can do to prevent it. And then really tried to grab and incorporate not just drainage staff, but the review staff, because the field staff were finding these things, sometimes not in the best manner. Sometimes we find it by hitting it, but if it was, and so that prompted, like, we need something. And so that really spurred the district on. We got a board that was very proactive and pro public drainage, and wanted to address the historic problems and make sure this doesn't happen in the future. And so we've worked closely with our engineers to develop that language and techniques for how do we prevent it and protect the system.
Perfect. Thanks, Ashlee. Thank you, Ashlee, and thank you, Tim. Appreciate the time. If anyone has any last minute questions for them, otherwise we are at 10 o'clock. Any last call for questions for Ashlee or Tim? Hearing none and seeing none at the moment, then we are scheduled for a 15-minute break.